Welcome back to Ultra Uncovered. I'm Corinne Shalvoy, joined as always by Russell Ditsworth. And today we are honored and super excited to have Tamira Jenlink joining us. Tamira is the race director for the Leadville Trail Series. We are going to kick this off with just learning a little bit about the history of Leadville. Specifically, we're going to talk about the Leadville 100 run, but we're going to dive a little deeper. And this is not a course preview. This is more of a high-level overview, the history, the magic of this race and race series, as well as talking a little bit about Tamara's personal experience, the athlete experience, the volunteers in the community. And like I said, we're going to go deep into the Leadville Trail 100 specifically ahead of some very exciting interviews we have with the athletes that are going to be lining up at the 2025 event. So thank you so much for joining us, Tamara. We're really excited to talk with you.
Thanks so much for having me on. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. So Tamara, I would just like to really love to know, when did you first come to know about the Leadville Trail 100 or any of the races that are
knowing
in
about the
Leadville?
events is probably mid 2000s. I mean, I think I've known about them for some time, but mid 2000s, I started my racing career a little bit late in the world as well, starting more so in my late 30s, early 40s as well. I think Corinne and I were talking about that briefly. My history with Leadville is a little longer than that, though. So that whole piece has had a lot of magic for me since I was 5, 6 years old.
So let's hear a little bit about that. I'd love to hear your history of Leadville. Yeah, it looks like you're coming to us from Leadville. I know that the summer of Leadville is upon us. We're recording this in about mid-June. I know the mountain bike camp has just happened, and we're getting ready to kick things off and really get going this year for 2025. So tell us a little bit about that experience with Leadville and your history.
I have been probably coming here since I was 5, 6 years old. I am the daughter of teachers, the granddaughter of farmers and ranchers, and my parents were teachers in Oklahoma and Colorado before I moved to Wyoming. But in that process, and while they were still together in my young years, our way to get out in the world was camping and was getting out to see the world. You took your car and you took your tent, and they were very avid outdoor humans. So we spent a lot of time in this very general kind of Arkansas Valley area. So I fell in love with Leadville at a very young age, and honestly have spent the better part of my 20s and 30s figuring out kind of a funny story if I would ultimately land in Crested Butte or in Leadville. So that has been on my radar from the get-go. And really the where it diverted, I guess, is Crested Butte was always about community I had there and the access in the backcountry. Leadville is a very magical space, but I think also it really hits me in something we can, probably get into more at some point. But the landscape meets me where, it fills my soul and my spirit, which is a little rugged, absolutely stunning, but a great place to kind of get lost and be on some of those longer self-reflective journeys. And so I've been doing that for a good chunk of my life in this area. And it really, eventually that and the community in Leadville sealed the deal. Like, this is where I needed to get to and land. And so I've had a long history with the community, and now 8 years full time in Leadville. I'm talking to you from my property that's just outside of Leadville at about 11,000 feet off grid.
Oh man, you had to go even higher.
I heard the top is the best. I don't know.
That's amazing. Yeah. Well, I love that. And I think we'd love to hear a little bit about your athletic background personally, because you are able to come at this. First of all, I absolutely applaud and love whenever there is a female race director, just because we need more and more of them, just like we need more female coaches out there. But yeah, so tell us a little bit about your background in sport. And then also, I know that you have a history with kind of working in fire safety. And so you're able to come at the race directing role from both the athlete aspect, the community aspect, the safety aspect, and the environmental and maintain the land. So all those things together, we'd love to hear a bit about, what your athletic background.
Well, how long do you have, Corinne? But, my parents were my mom was a runner. So, and I bring that up because I think this is sort of this interesting space around our ultra endurance events is what draws us into it, what really attracts us, what is it when we've got 100 miles or 200 miles to think about, or, be out there, what are we doing with those miles? And I've thought about this a lot in my background, like racing and that kind of thing, really, as I said, more so in my 30s and 40s. But I come from a family who has value around exercise, has value around the outdoors, and that intersection of, training or being involved in sports. I was avidly against running, but I did run in high school, mostly because my mom was a runner and also our track coach. So like any teenager, we have those natural aversions, but also there's some family health history in there that's interesting as well. That she was in the 70s. So we'll remember Karen Carpenter in this time, but my mom was a runner, also dealing with an eating disorder and all those components. So just laying some foundation to something that I think is actually really important, that why do we all do these things and why are we out there, as much as when did my history with it begin? But so my aversion was pretty strong, but I still ran, just not as avidly. And I found things like mountaineering and climbing and biking and cycling to be more in my lane for a long period of time. And in kind of the 30s, 40s of my age, I got into the cycling thing because of the community and family and the kind of the component of finding belonging in community in that space, which, I think is something that maybe we're all seeking on some level, and particularly in our current climate and current times, there's a space there that's really important. But anyway, in my 30s and 40s, I kind of got into biking and cycling and doing 24-hour events and doing different things. And running was sort of my training for that more than it was, in those components. And somewhere in that framework, somebody mentioned something about Leadville and, oh, you're going to go after one of those buckles. And I'm like, what? Buckle? What do you mean? And my first race was a mountain bike race. But I will say that the first piece that was probably the hook, line, and sinker was Here and Ken speak. Here and Ken and Mary Lee speak. And those are our founders of these events. And I think they were onto something, like long before we realized. We've got Brene Brown, who talks about the need for belonging and all these components of community. And I think without even realizing it, because of who they are and the essence of who they are, they brought this idea of community and belonging long before we had kind of zeroed in on it. And to hear him speak, in the late 90s, early 2000s, I think that was hitting the mark for a lot of humans. But for me personally, that was definitely one of those, I found something in that space that drew me in, not ever knowing that I would be in this space, later down the road. But from there, I ended up racing a number of times. I was actually stage race, the Silver Rush 50, the 100 mountain bike, all the mountain bike stuff I did a number of times. And then I was in the lead challenge in 21 before I took the position, which ended my lead challenge race that summer, because I took the position right before the stage race that year. So that's a very brief overview, intertwined with a lot of, I think just the importance of how we all get here too, right?
Yeah.
So that must have been a unique opportunity to kind of come at you at that time. Obviously you're in it as an athlete with the stage race. So tell us a little bit about kind of your first year as an RD. What year was that? And kind of give the listeners a little bit of a history of your involvement as a race director.
Last one.
These past years.
This one, right?
I love it. Thanks for sharing all of that. It's very interesting, and I appreciate you sharing it.
Yeah, well, and I think about what is our purpose for being out here a lot. What's driving us, what's drawing us in. But back to your question, Russ, the answer to that is that was 2021. And we had been out the RD and logistics human for maybe a few weeks at that point. And I was coaching, guiding for the mountain bike camp that summer, and started talking with Melly, who is our VP of operations, because he was the guy out trying to make sure it all stayed together while we were trying to fill that spot. And we kind of got into that conversation, and I had been kind of making a shift, as you alluded to. I've done all kinds of things, from wilderness therapist, mountain guide, firefighter, teaching, higher education, all those areas, and bringing them all together. And I was really at a chapter in my life where it was like, what's the shift? What happens next? And I had been up here for about 2 years, just kind of digging into that and sort of feeling through where I'd been and where I was going. And we got into the conversation and it made sense. All the things kind of fit together in the sense of a very unique, not sort of your traditional way of getting to an RD position, but all the things kind of, all the skills and all the different pieces that had played out at that point really play well in this environment in terms of, risk management to community and relationship and how are we engaging. And probably the most interesting or sort of attractive part to me was more around how do we take these events that are growing and they're having, some growing pains in our community, and how do we start to bridge that impact a little bit and make it a really healthy, next chapter. As we all know, when we start to bring 9,000 people into a 2,700 person town, there's impacts related to that. And so those components were really, I think, more of the problem solving and more of the relational community aspect of, and also the economic development. I think you asked something about kind of the history of these events, and these events are rooted in 1982, the mine shutting down and 3,500 jobs going away. And overnight, needing to think about how do we manage this component and how do we create a diversification of revenue streams in the community. And Ken merely, had the brainchild along with some support there that was, you got to get people to stay here overnight. And Ken will tell you all day long, every day, well, if you want them to stay overnight, just have them run 100 miles, right? We've all heard it and we all laugh every time we hear it. Boy, was he right. And that first race was 45 people on the start line. And now we're, up to 9,000 racers in a summer. And that's a huge revenue stream. And all of those things, like, as I was talking with Melly that summer of 21, were the things that were kind of the components that were a driver for me to say, I think this is the next chapter for right now. And they invited me. They said, hey, would you take the job? So it all worked out well together.
That's awesome. I mean, and I can personally relate to you. You mentioned a little bit ago ending your lead challenge. I've recently started a new job, and I was supposed to do 100 in July, and I'm not going to do it because I am full on with work, and it's not the best idea it's hard to balance those two. So I can personally relate with that, but it's also a blessing to be working in an area you're super passionate about. So, yeah, I hear you there. So we want to shift a little to talk about the athlete experience in Leadville, and across all of this is something that I think Russ and I both, why we keep coming back year after year is just that. I'm gonna pause. You're good? Okay, puppy. Yeah.
Yeah, dog.
No worries. Yeah, why I think a lot of individuals come back year after year is just that experience, the atmosphere, the environment that you have when you're there. So I guess the first question is kind of, what do you hope that athletes take away from participating in a Leadville event?
Well, that's an easy question too, right? I think Ken and Mary Lee started this whole component of you're better than you think you are. You can do more than you think you can. And they really landed that idea of come test yourself, but also dig a little deeper, dig into the journey, dig into those pieces. And for me, I think what I hope people take away, particularly in our current climate, no matter where you sit in all the politics and all the different things going on, if we're going to dig in this deep, and let's face it, like when we start to say, I'm going to run 100 miles or 200 miles, there's a lot of training that goes into that. There's a lot of time on the trail. There's a lot of time for self-reflection and to just dig in deeper to ourselves and in that sort of journey. And my hope in that space is that we don't stop there, right? That we go home with it. We do something with that learning, that we bring it back into our home space, back into our workspace, that it's bigger than ourselves, that we leave here being a part of something bigger than ourselves as well. And something that's an anchor, a grounding point of what's possible that we can build on. Also, that we don't just jump right into the next performative thing we can do, but actually ground a little bit in what just occurred. But take that back into our lives and back into our worlds and have that be a North Star that helps us equalize, and balance and guide and lead. And, I think the ability to be out for that depth of time and in that space and the ups and the downs and all the things that happen in there, and you get to do it inside of, a couple of days, right? That's a life-changing experience for many people. And how do we hold on to that and have that be something of a guiding force back in the rest of our lives?
Yeah. And, What kind of common traits do you see among athletes
find
that
success?
do
My head went
find
somewhere else, Russ, but
success
do
at
find success.
Leadville?
Actually, it might be true too. I have a friend who's told me that that she was doing 100-miler, but at 75 miles, she ran out of things to think about, so she was done. And where I extrapolate that to is, what are we doing for all that time? What is common about all these humans? What's happening? What's, whether it's just the successful humans at the front of the pack, the middle of the pack, wherever you are, but success in whatever that is for you, what is common? I sort of foreshadowed a little bit on my own personal experience of, a parent, a female in the 70s, struggling with an eating disorder, runner, struggling with demons, struggling with different things, but also stepping into that space, trying to learn about it. I think running for her was a space to kind of dig into those demons and to meet them and to learn about them and to wonder about them. And I extrapolate from that to the place of, is one of the common things besides gritty, determined, all those things that we can grab at, is there something around our ability to settle into self and to actually kind of dig a little deeper and to wonder and to meet ourselves in those really, let's face it, somewhere in that 100 miles or 200 miles or whichever your race is, but here, and in that 100 miles, you're probably going to meet some dark places. And our ability to hang out in that dark space and come through on the other side, and because it'll change, right? It'll change. Maybe it'll change in 20 minutes, maybe it'll change in 2 hours, but it will change for the better or the worse. It will change. And I think there's something about our ability to stay in those spaces and to actually wrestle with ourselves and to persevere in that level. Some of I think maybe the ethos of ultra running to some degree, how can I be in that space? So that's something I wonder about, is how many of us were looking for community to begin with, found it in that space, but also shared some common some common interests, some common desire to dig a little deeper into our own learning, our own paths, those things that challenge us, our edges. Because we sure as heck do find them out in the woods or the desert or wherever we're doing all those long miles, right?
Yeah, and it's something that it's funny. We don't do the training so that we don't feel the pain in the event. That's going to happen regardless. And Courtney DeWalter, I love hearing her talk about the pain cave and etching out a little deeper in the pain cave, and she's just excited to get to that spot so she can find out what she will learn in that spot. And so, it's not something that you can avoid. So it's something you need to accept and decide.
No, I was just going to say, I think
point.
there's also, there's two things that come to mind for me on that. One is just that, right, we live in a society where we have all of these comforts and we're voluntarily trying to find that place of uncomfortableness, which, I think is a healthy human thing and important for us. And I think that is one aspect of why people do endurance events and things that are very difficult physically and mentally. But also, like, around COVID, it's amazing to me to learn how many people started running during COVID. And yes, while it was, or riding a bike, it was one of the only things you could do, get outside and do all of that. There was a deeper, and it's weird to say that like COVID could have been good for us, but it also, I think it showed us not only how important it is to be with one another and have, community and the social aspect of things, but it also did, force us to go into ourselves, to think about things that were, that we wanted to do, to figure out ways to have that outlet of stress, personally. And I think a lot of people went outside for that and learned and found a new love, and it's something that was good for them that maybe they wouldn't have done otherwise. So I don't know. I think that we got kind of deep on all that, but I love that answer of just, it is to learn about ourselves. It's to constantly grow. And if you have that kind of mindset around it, I think that, yeah, you can be successful at whatever the distance or event is. So, yeah.
Well, 100%. And I do think COVID, I personally, anecdotally think, and personally think that, it gave us an opportunity away from an overperformative Western culture for a little bit. Like, everything stopped,
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you stayed in your house and just kind of did your regular thing at the house, but more people did get outside because it's what was available. And we think about what that does for the nervous system, and just stepping out of the zoo of the go, 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 and actually bringing everything down, and then opening those doorways to, there was a little more space to go maybe train a little bit, maybe run a little bit, maybe bike a little bit, maybe do things that you hadn't done. And then, there is endorphins and adrenaline and all those things that pair in there. But I also think beyond that, there's something deeper happening that when we're doing those longer miles outside of the human who's done it 75 miles, thinking about things, but she figured it out. She's done with that. She got to her answer. She's good, which we will have a good laugh about. But yeah, I'm with you. I think COVID was a big doorway, an important doorway. And I think we're almost starting to lose some of that a little bit again, falling back into our overperformative, but there's definitely a group that got grounded in or opened the door for them to step deeper into this space and to start to play with things they hadn't touched before, and maybe realize it feels good to not be in that super hyper aroused, overperformative technology / workspace. We can still do that in running too, right? We can still get into that overperformative space there too.
We can. Yeah. Okay, so kind of on that athlete experience, just another question around it. If you, and all of these questions, I know we could do an entire podcast on, but briefly, how would you describe the magic of Leadville to someone who hasn't been there? Because, that's one of our goals in this is sharing and getting people excited about what they could experience. And if you've been there and you're a listener, you know what it is, what it feels like, but, how would you describe it, having seen, the events evolve over the years?
Yeah, I'll try to do this as short as I can, Corinne. So, I think in my mind, I've been trying to put a finger on that for 20 years, probably. What is the magic of Leadville? And it's a combination of the landscape and I think how it meets our internal landscape. And it's also that foundation that Ken and Marilee laid of family and belonging. I think those things intersect and we didn't even know it, and then all of a sudden we're in it and we found this group of humans who are the community that we needed. At the same time, we're meeting that rugged, gritty, sort of tough, landscape. But many of us are internally as well, as I've already kind of shared, and all that colliding at the same time and having community in that space while moving our bodies and being at this elevation and, hitting some of these extraordinary views and just like highs and lows and all those pieces. It's all of it together, I think, and I do believe that at the heart of that is something to do with us finding our community in that space at the same time.
Love that answer.
All right. I'd love to move on to kind of the volunteers and the community aspect. You've touched on community. Obviously, you have strong ties to the community. I want to dig into that as well. But, thinking more on the volunteer side, volunteers are really just that lifeblood of ultra marathons, the actual event, being able to put on that event and support all of the athletes. Talk a little bit about your volunteer organization and what kinds of things they do to get aid to racers at such remote locations.
Places there too. So the volunteer piece, we are blessed. We are 100% blessed. We couldn't do anything that we do out here without them. From what started last weekend through August, we'll have upwards of 900, 1,000 people volunteering over the course of the summer. And, the hundreds will have 350, 400 people in each one of them. So it's, it's just huge. We'll see many of those folks over and over and over. So when I say 1,000 people, recognize that 30% of them are doing multiple events. So it's actually many more shifts and many more hours given than just 1,000 people. But they'll come and be a part of that. And it's really, that part's magical too, in a way that is hard to grasp in words, but watching these humans take care of the other humans coming in. And it's that sort of symbiotic or symbolism around family again, right? Like we're all in it together and you watch what happens with these volunteers at the aid stations, and what they're doing in terms of got your drop bag already figured out. They saw your number, however far away, trying to get that to you, and all the drinks and all the hydration and the fuel and all those things. And they will go a very long way to be a volunteer. In fact, I started this process 2 years ago, I think, where I said, hey, let's make this its own event, right? And we'll just open volunteer registration on March 1. And it's a flippin' just gas. Like it's a total smile, right? Because you open it up and they're like, if you don't open it up on time, they're on top of you. Like, what's going on, Tamara? What happened here? How come it's not open? And then you launch it and within an hour, you've got 400 shifts filled, right? Like it's just amazing how dedicated everybody is and how much everybody wants to be a part of the spirit. And it's like they're part of that whole energy and the whole experience. And it's almost like how I would almost say, this is a bad example, but like how a storm or a tornado builds, right? And as it just gets more and more energy, and it becomes this thing that is its own livelihood. It's its own life. It's its own kind of, organism. And it's amazing to watch that energy, and it's all the things together. So taking that, and then just to give you an example, and I think Hope passes on kind of our discussion point here today. And so for 40 years, we've had the llamas at Hope Pass, right? And that's one of those extreme, like in many people's worlds, getting up to Hope Pass, setting up that aid station, all those different things that happen. They leave here on Thursday of race week. They get up, they set up tents, they set up all the different, the water filtration system so we can get water down. And, they're hauling 40 gallons on Friday, another 40 to 50 gallons on Saturday to keep that whole thing going. And thank you to Toby and Gary, who've led that charge for 40 plus years. And I will say, we are making a shift this year. So the llamas retired this past year.
Wow.
So here's a big change. We're making it live and for real.
Breaking news. Okay.
And we have been deep in the trenches of bringing this back. The llamas have been extraordinary, and big shout out to those guys and their whole crew and all they've done over the years. And I think for anybody who's come through that aid station and gotten to see the llamas, it's just an energy shift right there. Big, furry, fuzzy faces, goofy faces, and it just helps lift the spirits, right? So we definitely have some shoes to fill. We're taking it back to the heritage of Leadville. So you're going to see donkeys and burros, and you'll see half pint burros. You'll see mules up there. You'll see a very much back into that mining history of Leadville this year. So we've been deep in the trenches of planning all this. And what we're super stoked about, our 4-H group, who've been really kind of reorganizing, will be the kind of the lead face of that. And then we've got this whole just wonderful crew of locals, and some folks who are coming out of over in the Vale Edwards area, and then over in the Pueblo area, but in the kind of borough land. And they're all coming together to be a part of this and taking it on for the next chapter of its life. So Hope Pass will continue on, but it will continue with the burros and the donkeys and the mules and all those fun furry faces. We'll still have them up there, and they will be hauling up all the gear on Thursday still, and they'll be hauling the water and all those things. So still some furry faces up there doing the hard work, but it's also the heritage and this is how we got everything where it is, and how these trails are in place to many degrees is because of our miners and because of the crazy amount of work that both the burros and the mules did over time, as well as the humans. So that's what you're going to see this year at Hope Pass, which is super fun. And we've got a lot of volunteers stoked about that too. And then just a big shout out to our volunteers. Like overall, it is an extraordinary group of humans who show up to make this thing happen. And part of it is family members who are just finding their space at an aid station and being there on course when their human comes through, but taking care of many others. And it's also people who are not necessarily able or wanting to participate as a racer, but want to be involved in a part of it. We also have locally, almost every aid station is captained by a local group. So a local nonprofit or school group or something like that. So we've got Cloud City Wheelers, Cloud City Mountain Sports, the high school, the arts program, all these different groups are captaining these. And then we have all the other humans coming in from the outside to help support those captains and those groups. So local groups that are running them along with everybody else. So that's a lot of volunteer information. What did I miss for you?
Oh, you hit a lot of things. I would love to hear, you mentioned some of the local organizations that are leading the various aid stations. Like how else does the race help benefit the local community? I know that there's scholarships that are out there. There's various things that are out there that are benefiting the local community. And obviously they are integrated into the race. You look at the start list and there's, tons of people from Leadville that are participating in the events and obviously supporting from a volunteer standpoint. So, I mean, what kinds of other things is the race organization doing to benefit the community?
Was the original foundation that Ken and Marilee set up as the branch and arm of the race series. So that organization itself raises funds, and all those funds stay here. And one of the areas that they fund are the scholarships annually. every senior who's going on to any kind of trade, 2-year, 4-year, whatever kind of learning environment is eligible for a $2,000 scholarship. And that is true every year and for every senior graduating. In addition, Legacy Foundation also supports a number of our local organizations with other dollars raised through the racers and different charity, like they have charity entries and the Dream Chaser. I'm not sure if we got that on there,
Oh
but
yeah, we're going to talk about
aspects. So they're raising a lot of dollars, and all those stay here and then benefit other local organizations from, again, all kinds of things, from the school to Cod City Wheelers, building trails, maintenance, some kind of an excavator that you need to actually execute those things. So all kinds of dollars staying there. And then on the race series side, we have the Lifetime Foundation doing a similar thing. And for us, like, for example, I mentioned those captains at the aid stations. Those are all different organizations here, and all of those get dollars back to go into those organizations for leading those aid stations. We probably do somewhere in excess of about 50,000 that goes into those local organizations every summer, just in that 2-month period. In addition, we typically do some kind of a project. Like last year, we did some things with the mountain bike and the running teams, but the year before that, we did 75K or so to get a bus for Get Outdoors Leadville, which is one of our local groups supporting all kinds of our different youth and families in the area. So we were able to help them get a bus to be able to handle transportation. Years before that, we've done things like put in a gym floor at the high school, put in, I don't know, it was like 220K to help put the gym floor in and do a new gym floor there. Nutrition has been a big piece that we focused on. So annually, being able to put dollars back into the community in meaningful spaces. And between like the Legacy Foundation and Lifetime Foundation, we're well over $1 million back in the last like 5 to 6 years, something along those lines. So it's a big chunk of money that's going back into the community and able to be a consistent support back to our different organizations and groups. Did I hit all the answer or the question that you asked, Russ? Did I get that?
You did. And I think one of the things that you touched on in terms of changes along the race brought up a question in my mind, and it's really centered around kind of the history of the Leadville Trail 100 run, the main route, and kind of the history of the race itself. Obviously, as an event changes and it grows, there's going to be logistical changes and things that happen along the way. But what do you view as kind of those non-negotiables in terms of like maintaining the history of the event?
To interrupt you, Russ and Tamara, but just we really appreciate that. I think Leadville 100, the run specifically, is maybe one of the only events I can think of that has not changed the route. Like there are races that change their route like every single year. And so the fact that this is the established route basically from day one going forward is a really unique aspect of this race.
Yeah, and that's Ken and Marilee and their crew from the get-go, right? Was to really get it across some of the more challenging, rugged, getting up through and over to Hope Pass, but also you're hitting Winfield, which is kind of in our oldest mining district area up there. So there's some pretty cool history tying it back into the heritage of the actual area. Mining is the background and the history of this whole landscape. And, you can go back to the late 1800s when it was at its heyday, and you're seeing 40,000 people up in this area. Today we're at 2,700, 7,200 countywide. So that's a big shift. And so part of that whole piece for them was really digging into that heritage and really keeping that alive. And we do not foresee that changing at all to any degree, the actual course itself. It is, I think the course it's what people come for, right? It is that whole experience of we're getting some CT, we're getting some of the, the Turquoise Lake, that single track, but we're getting into that Twin Lakes area. We're getting that Hope Pass climb over to Winfield. There's no need to change that. It is the money, right? It's the thing we all want to do. And if we were to change it, I think that would actually be detrimental at this point.
Yeah. Before we dive a little bit more into the Leadville Trail 100 run, I have to go back to the community aspect, because observationally, it's so cool that there are these micro microcosms of community within the race. And I know that's what we all love about ultra running and trail running and endurance sports in general. But it's just so cool that, you've got that volunteer community, from the aid station level down to the broader community of how it gives back to the infrastructure and the economy of the area. And then you've got the, running group community, the people that are the runners. You've got pacer and crew communities that like develop within the race day itself. And so we tend to kind of overuse that word community, but I think it's really interesting and beautiful how many different examples of community exist within this one event. And so just wanted to mention that I think that that's something we all love about these races, but Leadville in particular, it's very apparent there, and just love everything you're doing for the multiple communities that exist within the race.
Well, and I think it's something for us to continue to strive, to explore how we continue to sustain that together and just continue to develop those. I mean, in my own sort of world, it feels like, as we've already touched on many times, that community aspect is what draws us in and keeps us engaged, right? What we walk away from is that experience of, if you even think about like we've got some racers who are definitely tackling this on their own. And hopefully they're finding community in our aid stations. They're finding community in the different crews that are out there. I've been on the course myself where my crew was not where they were supposed to be. And, I'm coming through an aid station and I'm looking, and they're like, what do you need? What do you need? And they're handing off bottles to me. Right. And just like that support component. But then I take that back to Ken and Mary Lee and this idea of family that I think they landed without even realizing to what degree we all needed a place to belong and feel that community. And I think I probably will say that multiple times because it feels really true. And then you watch that unfold on race day, and it's all the different ways that we show up in that space together. And it is your volunteers, it's your staff, it's the runners themselves, it's the crews, it's the humans who didn't even know coming from Independence Pass who are like, what the heck is going on? And suddenly want to stop and be at Twin Lakes and just a part of the whole experience, because it's pretty powerful to watch somebody push their limits, but also be in that incredibly vulnerable space of needing some support and needing that help and like pushing those limits. And just how all of that creates a very magical space that is very hard to, I think, wrap a full picture of words around. But all of it, really strengthens that concept of family and connection and community. And I just think it's never been more important than today.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I mean, and the volunteer aspect, I'm not surprised that so many people sign up right away, because I think it took me a few years of running before I actually volunteered for an event, which was way too long. But once I did, being out there for a few hours at a time, and you being out there as a runner, knowing what these runners need, you just become an angel to these people, and vice versa. Like you get that, you get that love back in that you're helping enable somebody to do what they're out there to do. And it's one of the coolest feelings. So yeah, I totally agree that like there's so many aspects or so many ways to be involved, and it's so fulfilling just to be part of making that happen for a lot of people. So it's cool.
Well, we all need that, like a little bit of that feeling of value and purpose and meaning. And it's amazing how much of that you can just get drenched in it, right? Like you can be very valuable for a day to somebody. Yeah. And isn't it interesting that it can be as simple as pouring water into somebody's, pack, and how invaluable that is in that moment and that simplicity of that connection, but how powerful it is.
Or telling them that they're looking strong, or that they've got this, and giving them an encouraging word. And it's, right. We all know that's a performative thing, that you give that out to somebody else, even if you're running, and it also comes back to you.
Yes.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. And it's not just pouring, right? It's like, oh, hey, can I grab your flask? I'll go fill it up. What do you want in this one? I'll take care of it for you. And then I'll hand it back to you. It's like they want you to be successful so bad. They want you to come out there and just feel like you're taken care of and things like that. And, just from the volunteer sign up aspect, I'm sure that there are some areas that are very popular for the 100. Personally, I signed up for the Leadville Trail marathon spot at Resurrection. And I had to be on it. Like I had to sign up right away. And within a half an hour, it was 9 out of 9 spots were filled. And I'm texting a buddy and being like, "Did you do it?" And if you didn't, you're not, you can't volunteer at this spot. But so it was one of those things where it was like, yeah, it's fun. We're excited to do it. Those sorts of things. Okay, I got to get to the hard hitting question on the race. Let's talk about
You don't
4
like the
a.m.
start
Can
time?
you
What's
can you
wrong,
tell
Russ?
me a little bit about 4 a.m.? I love 4 a.m. I'm just, it's unique.
But it is
It's
one
not
thing that makes
common,
Leadville
and
Leadville. Like
I'm
it
I'm
is the four.
curious.
Yes, because I think about other races. UTMB starts at
Does
6 p.m.
it?
Some TDS like some so it is a component. I love it because
Okay.
I'm a morning person and I'd much rather start them than at noon. So, but we'd love to hear how that came to be if you know.
Well, and I think, one of the big pieces to think about is when your cutoffs are at Hope Pass and at Winfield, right? Like, it's not just to wake up all of 6th Street residents with a shotgun blast,
Mm.
but there is something in there about how do we get them through the hardest part potentially and back to more level ground. It's not all level. They still got some work to do, but that Hope Pass section and Winfield section. And if we can get, that your cutoff at Hope is at 4 p.m. to go on to Winfield. Otherwise you can go back down, and Winfield is 6 o'clock. And I'll tell you right now, last year was one year. The last 3 before that, we were pretty good. We were out of there by like 11 o'clock with our search and rescue sweep, which we have search and rescue come up from Winfield. But last year it was a 1 a.m. kind of 2 a.m. getting into Twin Lakes. And by the time just getting people off that pass safely and having, also people functioning at their best or their most optimal spaces to be making sure we're keeping people safe. Ultimately, you start to go later, and it's great for the rest of us because we don't have to be up at 4 a.m. and the 6th Street residents would be super stoked. But it does give us a little bit of an extra window of time to just get people out of that section safely. And not be at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. looking, because we're tracking everybody at that point and making sure that we haven't misplaced any humans on Hope Pass or anywhere in there. Because sometimes people, go off to go to the bathroom and come back or whatever. So that's a large part of it, is just trying to look at the long-term picture here, and much rather have you in the middle of the night going through Turquoise Lake where there's not many places you can go, right? You're going to end up on a road versus on the side of a mountain somewhere in the wrong space.
Yeah, and one of the things that I advise others when we talk about Leadville is like, hey, the cutoffs are tough. You gotta put yourself out there and get yourself over and across Hope Pass, and it's not easy. It's tough, but once you get back in time. You can breathe a little sigh of relief. You can kind of relax and regroup, and you can catch yourself back up to get. And then you've got crew, you've got all this support. Like there really is. It's almost like 2 races within a race. It's the race to get yourself back to Twin Lakes, and then it's the race for you and your crew to get yourself back to Leadville. So I can totally understand that. And if 4 a.m. helps us on the first part of the race,
yeah,
I'm willing
some
to
folks are
accept
going to be
that,
out there
and
till 10
I'm
a.m.
all for it.
is no matter what. But I think ultimately getting them out of there, we are at the current moment in my tenure at this point, we have had everybody off of Hope Pass by midnight at the very, very latest, and back into Twin Lakes. It's actually maybe 11:30 and back into Twin Lakes by 1 a.m., which is still verging on. You're hitting that really weird wall of how you're feeling physically, emotionally, spiritually, and all those pieces, along with the terrain and all the different aspects that are converging at the same time. So while there is still, risky stuff in the CT section out of Twin Lakes back over to Half Pipe, a little bit easier to retrieve the humans out of that area or to support from that area as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That makes sense.
I wanted to shift a little bit, and Russ, if you want to go back to anything about the Leadville Trail 100, feel free to. But I love how we went deep on just the magic of the race, the atmosphere. I think from this, hopefully everyone hears and feels like they should come experience it in one aspect or another, just because it is so unique. But I'd love to know, last year we saw a record-breaking performance by David Roach, beating Matt Carpenter's record. So David ran 15:26:34, 16 minutes faster than Matt's some said unbreakable time of 15:42:59. And I just love to hear. I was there on the ground, was, lucky to be able to be a little bit of a part of David's day. I mean, we also saw other historic performances on the women's side with Mary running a very, very strong time. And the other men, Ryan Montgomery winning non-binary division, running also an amazing top time. So tell us a little bit about just kind of, from your standpoint, like, what do you think about kind of these record breaking and very fast times being run, and how do they make you feel about the future of the Leadville Trail 100?
Well, no doubt it's exciting, right? Like it's super, super amazing to be there as David comes across, and, he put everything out there, and I think Mary too, like Mary rocked it. She was on that trajectory there for a little bit where she could have broken Trayson's record for sure, but she's got a shot at it next year and is in the lineup for that. So hopefully, if all things work out, she's still able to run it next year. We'll see what happens, right? But I mean, it's awesome to watch that. It's awesome to see people push the limits. And I think ultimately what I know about the nervous system, about our whole being, is that we're far more adaptable than we think we are. So as we watch these things unfold, it's not so surprising to see people breaking these records and seeing the new times that we're setting. We're training, we're doing things today that we were not doing 20 years ago. 30 years ago, an ultra was 26 miles. It was a marathon. That was like, oh my gosh, people are running marathons, right? And now 100 miles, 200 miles, 300 miles, whatever, like multi-day stage things. And we're seeing what is possible when we really dig into that well, into that vast, very deep well, and discover that there's a lot more there than we knew. And our capacity is so much bigger. So it's pretty awesome to watch that. But then, it's also awesome to watch the middle of the pack and the back of the pack push the same limits and push the same edges and get to a place they didn't even know they could get to, and cross that line in under 25 and under 30 hours and all those things. So awesome to watch all these things. Is it fun to think about Mary coming back and maybe busting that record out of the water? You bet it is. And, maybe we can get Ann to come be there at the finish line. We'll see what happens. Right. But honestly, it's super fun to be a part of it. It's super fun to watch these humans. And also the thing about David and Mary both is the graceful humbleness that I've experienced in both of them. And to me, that's the piece that I want to see continue too with sort of this platform. Is we don't get into the over performative space of this, but there's something that's all lining up that's allowing us to achieve that amazing outcome, and that humbleness, or that sort of that depth of just genuineness that shows up across that line with both of them as they came across, and just who they are in humans. I hope we can keep that piece in there too, in that mix, right?
Yeah, I think both of them and a lot of the people that go run Leadville just bring that historical, David was like, I'm chasing history, wouldn't be able to be done without any of this historical stuff. And, no doubt he read, Matt's in-depth, preparation of the race, and people very much respecting what's been done before to keep building on it. I think is amazing. But I also feel like it's like the Leadville Trail 100 run in particular has had kind of keeps having this renaissance of being back in the limelight, from back in the Born to Run days of it originally, but then, this really reaching the masses, and so many people when it happened last year with David, just learning about the event itself. It just doesn't go away. It keeps showing up in, even outside our little world, which is a really cool thing. So, hopefully it'll continue that way. And I know personally that there's a number of women who are going to be going for, big times, like both this year and in the future, that I'm really, really excited to see.
Yeah, I'm super stoked as well. And that piece just lends to the magic. But I think also, as you kind of alluded to, Corinne, like that piece of history, the Ann Trayson days and the Tarahumara and all those different elements that fed our souls reading the stories, or being a part of it, or seeing it, or however that all showed up for us. And there's a part of this that I hope we can not lose that. And I think we have had some growing pains, and how can we recapture some of those pieces as well? And I think they're helping us bring that back, which is amazing, and look forward to how we can continue to do that.
Well, and one of the things that Leadville does, I compare a little bit to Western States. Western States has this golden ticket series, right? But it's really only for those top athletes. And Leadville has the coins at the various races, and the coins can be won by the top athletes winning the race. It can be won by top athletes in their age group, and it is a legitimate lottery at the end of these events. So there's really these three opportunities to gain entry into the Leadville Trail 100, and it's not just for the coming year. It's potentially to be deferred, and so that you can kind of line up that training the way that you might want to. Can you talk a little bit about, the ethos behind the coins, and what events, obviously the Leadville Trail Marathon has the coins at it. The Silver Rush 50 has coins at it. I know that there's a Tahoe event. There's an event in Austin. Kind of talk about the coins themselves, like, the kind of the excitement and the spirit around those.
Trying to balance entry and making sure that there's some accessibility to all, and not just, front end of the pack, but that there is that component of accessibility to everybody, and trying to create that, in a few different places than just Leadville. So we obviously have our spaces here in Leadville where you can qualify. I think it's also, honestly, from just a physical experience piece, it's great to come out and do a 50 first and see what that feels like. Like, what is that like at altitude? And the 50 is no joke. But so there's the component of, I think there's a sequencing to it that can be really helpful to come to a marathon. And you don't necessarily need to bite off the whole thing. Might be a little bit of a gateway drug. It's true, but it might be a healthy one, just thinking about that. And I think ultimately that spirit, that fun piece of giving out the coins at each event is super intoxicating. It's super awesome, and I think we will protect that equality as much as we can, in terms of at the end of the, if you made it through that event, the 50 or the marathon in the cutoff time, then you're eligible for that lottery at the end of that. We will protect that there's always some entries there. So that just for whoever, it's not just performative. It is also just available and accessible for showing up and putting your heart and soul on the line, and putting your toe on the start and pushing through and getting to that cutoff time, that you're eligible for that as well. We're trying to branch out and add a few, as there's the Austin, the Tahoe, all those pieces that you spoke to, and make that also a little more accessible if you can't make it to Leadville specifically. But, it's got a lot of energy to it, and it's super fun when Mary Lee starts pulling names out of the hat and, figuring out, the anticipation of who's going to get that 15, 20, whatever slots it happens to be for that event. But super fun. Yeah. It's awesome.
What I've noticed is year after year, the word has gotten out. People are staying longer and longer to be a part of these things. I recall a Leadville Trail Marathon that was very dim weather, and a lot of people left. If you hung around, you had a really good shot. So I just think people are understanding the excitement of it, and
right?
are
And
around
I remember,
longer for each one
I
of
rode
these
the
events.
first stage race, and I'm trying to remember. I think I was in already from a performative side, but the fact at the end of that, because it was where we were in the trajectory and the timing of that, pretty much everybody got in that year, right? Who rode the stage race. That was a super cool moment of where we were. But while we can't do that every year anymore, but hanging out and seeing who's going to get there. And it is a pretty fun party at the end of the whole thing, and a lot of excitement around it. So super fun. And we do have the Coldwater Run. Have you guys heard about that guy? That's a new launch for us this year. So another one in kind of the Virginia direction. So that's kind of fun as well. Trying to branch out and get some things on the East Coast area. That's October 24 and 25. I'm sorry. That's Anniston, Alabama. I said Virginia, but
okay, Alabama.
Don't listen to me.
I had heard about that one. I hadn't heard about a Virginia. Is
Alabama?
So there. Okay, so it sounds like there's 5. There's the Alabama and the Austin that are kind of late season for the following year, and then maybe the year after. And then there are the 3 leading up in the summer,
and so
the 2 in Leadville. And
the ones before the 100 run, you can either do this year or you can do next year. The ones after are only good for the following year. So, yep.
Okay, perfect. So that's just a one-time. Awesome. Great. Okay. That makes sense.
I mean, just, yeah, personal story. You made my husband's year because he was, an age grouper and just outside of like that top, those top spots at the marathon. And he ended up getting a coin, and it was like one of the last ones given out, and we were all freaking out in the parking lot. It was like, it's like he won the lottery. So it makes for a very exciting like environment as well, and just some great memories.
Well, and I think there's an element. I remember the first year I got a coin myself. It was not a performance coin. It was a lottery coin, and it was out of the 50 mountain bike. And I was so new to it all at that point. It was like, yeah, it was, you just felt the huge rush, but also like, wow, what a gift. And you really won, like you really won something that was important. And I hope that feeling continues for folks, and that, we would love to see everybody out there. We of course have permit numbers that limit us in terms of how many. And then there's a safety issue of athlete experience and overall just keeping it, too many folks in certain areas is not good for anybody's athlete experience. And we want to make sure that stays to be a quality thing that you've trained and hustled for. So we want it to be a good experience for everybody.
Yeah. But Leadville is also one of the races that has a quite a bit higher cap than a lot of the other big hundreds in the US, for that permitting. And so I do feel like it's really awesome for people to be able to, have a fairly good shot at getting in, within a couple of years, because it's a larger field, which is wonderful.
It's a larger field, and it is definitely, we have to work hard to maintain that and make sure that our partnerships locally stay really strong with the Forest Service and with the city, the county, BLM, all these folks, all of us working close together to make sure that we're keeping it managed and sustainable. And it is something that, with our crews, I think we didn't dig into it, but there is a slight crew change this year with Twin Lakes. Do we want to talk about that for a quick second, or is that the wrong timing?
No, that's great.
No, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that. There is information posted on the website for people that are curious about the very specific details, but maybe you can talk about the primary reason for the change and
last year you saw us say no more driving to
the
Twin Lakes, and I
area.
think all of this is trying to find that balance of, and it's really interesting. Like with the mountain bike, our cap, is higher than it is for the run, so the permit cap is higher, right? So, and our start line last year is maybe 1750 or something like that on the mountain bike, and we probably see it moves much faster, but we don't. It's a 12-hour or less event, and you don't see quite the same crew structure showing up. So maybe we have 4,000 or 5,000, 3,000 to 5,000 people showing up as crews for that event. And on the run, we are seeing upwards of 8,000 and 9,000 people showing up, which speaks to the magic. It speaks to the whole overall like communal experience. The fact that, what I can only imagine and think about from my own standpoint of having done this is what's happening at home for those years beforehand, before you get to that bucket list, whether it's a year or two, but all the family, all the different humans who are stepping in to support and be a part of that journey that you're on. So it's not just the athlete, right? It's all these humans. And so then by the time we get to the run and we've got 8,000, 9,000 people, and for the last couple of years, as I started in 21, I of course came in under the fire hose and wasn't making any changes that year, and was still pretty much breathing the fire hose in 22, and then started to look at what was happening out on 82. And part of it is we had so many cars backed up and parking out there that the risk factor in our minds really around the fact that we hadn't seen a motorist / pedestrian interaction at that point. It was just getting to a place where safety wise, it didn't feel like we could keep everybody safe. And we want to make sure that that's the first priority, is that you all come home, y'all come, and then you all go home together. And that we're not having some changes in that we didn't plan for. So that was a big piece, with safety and just overall management. And then also, thinking about how do we do this in a way. So as you've alluded, our permit cap is a little higher, but that means we've got to be even more kind of fastidious about how we manage that to make sure that everybody stays safe. And you've not only got that whole thing happening, but then at the same time, it's August. So everybody's coming from Aspen. They're coming over Independence Pass. There's this convergence of just tourism and the event at the same time. So we moved away from driving out there. And, what I would call out to our crews is you're doing an amazing job. You are phenomenal humans. And I imagine, and I can tell that most of the time you probably feel way more stressed than your athlete does. You're trying to make sure that you're in all the places and all the things. And to the point where you might even go against what Tamara asked you to do and go drive out there anyway. So please don't do that this year. But we've made some shifts in our shuttle system. So last year, we went from moving probably a few thousand people by shuttle across the whole season to moving 6, 7, 8 per each 100 events, 6, 7, 8,000 people. So it was a big jump in the shuttle piece. So it was a learning curve for us for sure. We don't want you to miss your humans. We want you to be where you want to be. But we did ask for a very clear, like four wristbands for Twin Lakes, and that we really stick with that plan. That for supporters, we went to the mat with a variety of athletes and talked through it to really figure what do we need to have to be successful. And most people thought 2, and we thought, okay, so we got to find the balance between that, and we know that you all came to be a part of this. So where's that balance point? So we said 4, but we need to hold to that. So you're going to see us a little more stringent at outward bound. So that's where the shuttle originates from, is outward bound, going out there. We'll be watching for those wristbands. We realized last year that we were not. And so we had probably 2,000 or 3,000 people getting on, if not more, without wristbands. And that really choked up the plan, because the plan that we have in place for the shuttles is to move exactly the number of humans that we said we would move. So it really relies on us sticking with the plan we have in place. And it's also, in my mind, this is how we be good humans in the backyard of Leadville and Lake County, is that we think about the sustainability and the stewardship of these events from a standpoint that's bigger than ourselves. So we want every athlete to be successful. We're trying to map out, very thoughtfully a plan that will set that up to happen. And then the next part of that shift for this year is you won't see crewing in the visitor center at Twin Lakes. They will all be within the village. But what we have done is we've added spaces with private property owners in there that we were not utilizing before, to ensure that we have the same number of spaces. You saw that, everybody's probably gotten onto this now. Hopefully you've opened your emails. Don't just look at them, but open them. So we had a drawing for those spaces to try to get some equality around that process as well. We kind of had a zoo last year so that was the first year we said, hey, I think every year before that at 6 o'clock PM, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock PM on Friday, you could come out and set up your tent space. So we thought, hey, since we're going to say no driving out there, we're going to have a system, but we'll let you come out at noon on Friday to set up. And what we saw was a bit of a zoo. Suddenly, by saying noon, then everybody was like rushing out there. We also had a little bit of just a break between the town setup was noon and the visitor center was 3 o'clock, which we think set up some dynamics that just didn't quite work well. So this year we took that out. We'll have set times to come out. They're going to get those in their emails attached to their bibs as we get the bibs assigned. They'll know what time they can come set up on Friday. But we have just as many spots. Actually, we might even have more, is what we're uncovering at this point. So then we actually had between the 2 spaces. So plenty of spaces based on that. But we went to a lottery system or kind of a drawing system to make sure that we're managing from the get-go. So if you come in early, you're going to be stopped at the entrance to Twin Lakes, and you'll be asked to wait at Moach parking area, which is the fishing site just up the road. And then when it is your time, we'll bring you in and make sure you get to your spot. Those spots will all be allocated and assigned by bib number. So that's the big shift this year. Just trying to have managed chaos. It's still going to be a little crazy and fun, and that's part of what we love. We don't want to take too much of that away, but we do want to make sure that ultimately we've got good eyes and control. We've seen some things where, last year's process, I think we learned a lot, and we want to tighten up the shuttle piece. That's going to help us with that. And then also just making sure that on the kind of Thursday and the Sunday, Monday side of things, that we've got everything cleaned up in there. So just a lot more management out in that area and just oversight. And that all comes back to, we want to be good community partners. We want these events to continue forward, and we want them to continue forward at the numbers they're at, which means we got to kind of work together to make this happen. So big call to action to all of us to just join in that mission together, and we'll get you out there safely and soundly and well within your time frame, as long as you have a wristband.
Yeah. So get your wristbands. Well, and I was just going to say, so it sounds like that's amazing. You got the athlete input on kind of making those changes. Appreciate that. And I think, just speaking from my experience, Twin Lakes is amazing. It is its own vibe. It's its own awesome part of the race. But Outward Bound is also right. And Outward Bound has so much space
Yep.
that it's
Yep.
like everybody can be at Outward Bound if you want them to be. And it's a great place. We've had great experiences, just setting up breakfast in the morning there, having, some food going in the evening for the crew and the families. It's a lot easier to get to for everyone. And there's so much space. And I think it's a pretty critical spot, especially coming back. I've seen so many runners, including myself, have like really, really, really need the cruise right there. It's a crux of the race. It's, you've got 30, 25 miles to go, but it's a critical point. And I think that it's cool. And I would just encourage people, like you're saying, to think about doing a solid cruise stop there.
Yeah, and I thank you, Corinne, for bringing that up. I mean, we are really pushing that Outward Bound space for both sides of it. The experience overall, like, it'll be a hub. It'll be a great place to just hang out. Pipeline is also available if people want a little distance from that, which is right there as well.
Yep.
But there's going to be a lot going on out there, right? We'll have some food. We'll have some, options for the actual cruise, but there is ultimately tons of space. And as you alluded to, I think the other critical component is when people are coming through, that is a really important stop, a really important aid station to making sure that we've got people taken care of. And they are pretty beat up by the time they get to Outward Bound on the inbound.
Thank you. Appreciate that explanation. And unless, Corinne, you have anything else, I'd love to just close on maybe just a single piece of advice for our 2025 runners here. They've got a couple months of training left. What kind of sage advice do you have for our runners?
Yeah. I think on the literal technical side, I'd say play with the Never Second and Scratch products that we'll have on course this year. You will see this is a new addition this year on the fueling side with the Never Second Carb 60 fueling. So if you're really relying on those things, now is the time. Don't wait until race weekend to play with that, but get playing with those things now. The hydration will stay the same, with the kind of standard. We'll have a caffeine, non-caffeine version at the aid stations, and then Scratch will have its chews and its bars, while Never Second will have that fueling option, which is super, I think, exciting for us to all think about, is something that we have not had before. And then they'll also have their gels there. So play with those two things if you can. And on the other side of that, I would say, honestly, slow is smooth is fast has been a phrase we've been using a lot recently, and just stay in there, right? Like, take the steps. You're in the home stretch right now. Let's go in here and let's come away with more than we came in with, which means just really digging into yourselves. You have so much more than you do inside that vast well. And we believe in all of you, and we look forward to seeing you at the start and the finish line. But ultimately, this is not the time to panic. This is the time to just kind of settle in. Like, this is the time to just do your work and do your tapering those last few weeks off, and then come out here and be present. Just be here. 100% show up, be in it, and let it unfold with you, and take home more than you came with.
I think that is a great place to end it. Thank you so much, Tamira, for joining us today. I'm excited that we were able to kick off our Leadville series this year with an interview with you. Thank you so much.
Thanks so
and we
much
are
for having
looking
me
forward
on.
to a summer of Leadville.
Watching and connecting with you more, but thank you so much. Appreciate the opportunity.
Tamira, this was awesome. It was great to get to know you a little more, and we're really excited, and thank you for all the hard work leading in these next few weeks.
Awesome. You guys, we'll see you soon.
See you soon.